Hello and welcome back, guys, to a special episode today. We are going to be doing a playthrough of a game that I played. In fact, I think I played it a while ago, but I played it again recently, and it has been touted as one of the most profound games you can play. The concept of it is it's just a really fascinating exploration into this question of how much can you really know someone through the words they use, the art that they create. There's that whole kind of saying, isn't there, of does the art tell you anything about the artist? Is the art really a representation of the artist, or is the art separate from them? Is that just something they are making? And there's lots of twists and turns, and I've played it before, but Ben's never experienced it before. So Ben's going to be
I have no idea.
You guys,
I only saw it
experiencing this for the first time.
I'm excited.
So let's start with that, actually, because I think that's quite good context. We'll open it up with the little kind of trailer, so we've kind of got context of what we're about to get ourselves into here.
Let's say you sit down at a stranger's computer. You start opening up files and looking through stuff, and eventually you come to a folder that just says My Work. So you open it, and you click on a random file, and it's a video game that looks like this. If you had to guess, what would you say you know about this person right now? Like, maybe they're kinda goofy. Okay, you close that, you scroll down a bit, and you open up a new file. It's another game. Do you think this person is happy? Are they unhappy? Now another one. What do you think is comfortable for this person? What puts them at ease? Do you think they're lonely? What's missing in their life? Keep going, open another file. Let's look at all of them. Let's unpack this person. Are they upset about something or fighting something? What do you think makes this person angry? What kinds of friends do they have? Do they even enjoy making video games at all? Take all of these images, hold them in your mind, and now try to imagine, without ever having met this person, who they are. Okay, let's do it. Let's find out if you're right.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Play.
Hi there. Thank you very much for playing the Beginner's Guide. My name is Davey Wreden. I wrote the Stanley Parable, and while that game tells a pretty absurd story, today I'm going to tell you about a series of events that happened between 2008 and 2011. We're going to look at the games made by a friend of mine named Coda. Now, these games mean a lot to me. I met Coda in early 2009 at a time when I was really struggling with some personal stuff, and his work pointed me in a very powerful direction. I found it to be a good reference point for the kinds of creative works that I wanted to make. So just to start you off, this is, I think, the first game he ever made. It's a level for Counter-Strike. You can walk around here, by the way. And mostly it's just Coda learning the basics of building a 3D environment. But what I like is that even though he starts from the simple aesthetic of a desert town, he then scatters these colorful abstract blobs and impossible floating crates around the level. And of course, it destroys the illusion that this actually is a desert town, and instead this level becomes a kind of calling card from its creator. It's like a reminder that this video game was constructed by a real person. And it kind of makes you wonder, what was going through his head as he was building this? This is what I like about all of Coda's games. I mean, not that they're all fascinating as games, but that they are all going to give us access to their creator. I want us to see past the games themselves. I want to get to know who this human being really is. And that's exactly what we're going to do here. So, it's 2008, Coda starts making these games, and he never releases any of them. He doesn't put them onto the internet, he just makes them and then immediately abandons them, and they sit on his computer forever. And I think he really understood this image of himself as a recluse. At one point, he jokingly renamed his computer's recycling bin to Important Games Folder. So, this was just how he worked. He tended to crank them out one after the other without even really pausing to try to understand what he had just made, until suddenly one day, he just stopped. In 2011, that was it. He made his last game, and then he hasn't made another one since. And that's why I've taken this opportunity to gather all of his work together, is because I find his games powerful and interesting, and I'd like this collection to reach him, to maybe encourage him to start creating again. And if the people like you who play this also happen to find his work interesting, then I'm sure it'll just send that much stronger of a message of encouragement to Coda. So thanks for joining me on this. If you have a particular interpretation that I haven't mentioned here, or if you just need to get in touch, you can email me at daveywreden@gmail.com. Okay, that's about it for introduction. Let's take a look at Coda's first proper game. As each game is loading, I'll show you the date that it was completed. This first one was made in November 2008.
What do you think so far?
So are we like? Is that what's going to happen? Like, it's a collection of all of his work.
Yeah, basically.
That were
So
the game is based on all. It's kind of like a deep dive into sort of like the segments of all these games that he made.
Yeah, so and they're not even necessarily games, right? He's like he said, like this is his kind of friend Coda, and he's just like
Made these projects.
Made these projects, call them games, but they're not really even games. They're just like half-finished things that he was just a geeky developer, you know, and he's kind of like unpacking all of them to try and dissect and learn more about him. Yeah,
it's a very nice idea to kind of dive into someone's unfinished work, or just ideas. Yeah.
But then it's also a little bit kind of questionable about does Coda even want him to do this? Like,
I was kind of thinking that as you as you were saying. I mean,
because that's the whole question of it, isn't it?
Because, the fact that he sort of stopped, it's sort of like, well, maybe he just didn't want to do it anymore.
Well, that's the interesting thing, and it's the fact that he said he never released these games to the public. Like, as soon as he said that, I was kind of like, well, hang on, like, who are you to release them?
Right.
Kind of. It's a little bit weird.
Warning. Whisper machine active. Should destruct the
This game is called Escape from Whisper, and it's one of the more generic games you'll see from Coda.
Security call breached. Hostile alien life form inbound.
It kinda looks like this game was abandoned mid-development. For instance, you have this gun, which you'd think would indicate that there are supposed to be monsters or enemies somewhere, but then clearly there are no enemies anywhere. You can't even reload the gun when you run out of bullets. But ultimately we don't really know. Maybe Coda thought that actually it was complete the way that it is. And I think that we should talk about his games for what they are, rather than for what they're not.
Enemy force neutralized. Begin shooting evacuation.
I love how you can see the bottom of the universe from this room. Apparently this space station has a labyrinth on it. Sure, I don't know. There's really no reason for it that I've ever been able to discern, so in the interest of time, I'm just gonna skip you on past it. Okay, this is the part that's interesting. The game has this narrative about the whisper machine and how it has to be turned off, and then you get to the engine room.
Hey, you there, in the engine room. You could save us all. That beam is powering the whisper machine. We could disrupt it by introducing a great enough heat signature. If your body could stop the beam. It's so much to ask, but for all of our lives, would you do it? Could you give yourself?
Let me pause here for a second. What you just experienced stepping into the beam and then dying, is probably what Coda had initially intended when he was developing this level. But when he first compiles and plays it, something goes wrong. There's a bug somewhere. And this is what happens instead. The beam causes you to start floating. And this is an important moment for him. Because yes, this is technically a glitch, but Coda identifies something human about it, like how small it makes you feel in the face of this larger chaotic system. Or this floating could be the afterlife, a peaceful place, juxtaposed against all of the hysteria that you've just had to traverse. I don't even know. I have no idea what he was thinking, but what's clear is that after making this, something lodges itself in his brain. He wants to do more of these really weird and experimental designs. So he stops work on this and moves on to a stream of tiny little games that go in all sorts of directions. Let's go ahead and take a look at the first game he made after leaving this one behind.
What do you think about that one?
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it's like there's not really much. It's interesting, I guess, the relationship between games and like there's no particular story. It's like just the mix between games and philosophy. Like it just had to play out, and you kind of go on that journey. There's no real. I don't know. Like I guess exactly that. You make your own mind up out of it. And what's interesting to zoom out, was that actually like a flaw to actually zoom out of the shot?
Yeah, I don't know. It just that's what he's saying. He's like assuming it's a glitch, right? Because he's obviously letting fix. Well, he quote unquote fixed the game, so you like dead. But he like who knows? Like it's like he said, like maybe Coda intended for that to actually be.
Or it kind of accidentally happened and then was pleased with it, kind of thing.
Yeah, and you're like floating away to the afterlife.
Yeah, and an interesting idea of like looking over what you've just done. Yeah, and realizing it kind of was just a construct.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Yep, in this game you can only walk backwards. So it's a short and relatively minimalist experiment combining motion and narrative. It is less advanced than the previous game, but actually it seems to be more focused, more complete. Coda's trying to give it a unique voice rather than simply basing it on a pre-existing trope.
I mean, that's just a great idea anyway.
It's a short little thought, it says what
It's
it
like
wants
you
to
don't-
say, and then it ends. Didn't need anything more than that. Which to me is why it
I
works. because it
I
gets
guess
out
because you
quick.
know that there's something coming,
Okay,
but you
excellent.
don't find out.
Yeah, they're kind of like ideas, like feelings represented in a. It's almost. Do you know what it's kind of similar to? They're similar to like dreams, aren't they?
Yeah. I
Do you
think
know what I mean? It's like there's subconscious manifestations that you can kind of play. Because that's the unique thing about games, is that because they're interactive, you get to kind of play them out. Do you know what I mean?
I think when I watched the advert, I was kind of thinking that the kind of relationship between. It felt like it was. I didn't really know what it was about, but I sort of felt like it was just a sort of a dive into the folders with just like aspects of his mind in the same way that we sort of store information. And there's something satisfying about like it's like when I watch like an AI video, and that feels like a dream to me because it's like you never because it continuously wobbles and moves, you can never catch it. Like real life, it's sort of like certain, there it is. You know, everything looks really still and absolute. And then these AI videos, everything wobbles, and it is a bit like a dream. And these, I guess, have that aspect to them. You can't quite find them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's true. You are now entering.
Entering what?
That is the question.
And that's it. Okay, the meaning of this game won't be clear just yet. Please be patient with me for a few more games, and I promise you'll see what makes it interesting.
It is easy to read into these. I think that's the thing with like any abstract form of art. Like the thing that this like very clever abstract art does is it just kind of invites questioning. And but again, like I'm saying that, but you know, like maybe this wasn't meant to be seen. So and it's funny, isn't it, how easy it is to read into something and actually how maybe there is literally nothing there. It's almost like disappointing to think like, you know, we're like hypothesizing all these things, but really maybe there was nothing there in the first place, you know?
Yeah, and I feel that's a bit like ideas anyway, isn't it?
True. Yeah.
I think sometimes you
They're
actually,
all like
I
ephemeral.
definitely work on ideas and then find out what it's about later. As in, or maybe I create a meaning to it after.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and often the meaning we create it's almost like, you know, by getting the truth. The truth can be disappointing sometimes, right? It's almost like the meaning we've created, the story we've created, might be more quote unquote exciting than the truth.
Yeah.
You know?
Oftentimes, Coda would put bizarre titles like this one at the start of his games. I wish I'd known him at the time that he was making these early games. He would really only talk to me about his work as he was making it. Once he stopped work on a game, like, that was it. It was dead to him. And I don't agree with that at all, but what are you gonna do? Once you've been slowed to an absolute crawl, the door at the top of the stairs opens. So why, if Coda's not showing these games to anyone, why bother opening the door at all? Well, to show you, I'm modifying the game here so that when you press enter, it'll bring you back up to full speed so you can enter the door for yourself.
But it's this
Does
is
it
like
slow down?
Yeah, like you can't like the door open. But this is the thing, right? It's kind of like contradictory of what he's saying, because he's saying like, oh, let's get to know Coda, but then if he keeps modifying the games and you don't get to experience the way he made it, how can you really get to know Coda?
I mean, I feel like that's very that is the point. That's very much the point. You don't even quite see it. You just hear it. You just hear the door, and you slowly can't get to it. I mean, that's really. I guess it's just about reaching the goal.
Yeah, you can modify.
You'll never actually be at the top. Oh, I don't want to go in the room.
And it almost feels like a violation. But then what is all these things? Game filled with chairs. A game of only... So these are like all ideas for games. A game where you collect items, except... Okay.
A room that's warm and nice and filled with little ideas for games.
So it's almost like, it's kind of like... That's almost like, maybe it's like the mind and that's the ideas.
Coda would often tell me
maybe it's
that
like
he
when
didn't
you're
mind
trying
if people thought of him
to
as
reach
cold
for
or
ideas.
distant. He
But
said
was
he knew
that
he
all that
actually
information
a vibrant and compassionate person,
in that
but
room
it takes
that you
time
could
to
never
really
get
see.
to?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, because it's slow. I mean, you could if you kept, because you were still moving,
So you would eventually get there.
You would probably eventually get there, yeah. But maybe that's kind of the representation of like, you know, that kind of last stretch of getting to the gold, getting to the ideas is like often, you know, the biggest struggle. Maybe. Who knows? I don't know.
That it can be a very slow climb to get there.
You are a gate.
Well, this is new for Coda. It's an actual puzzle. Go ahead and see if you can solve it. Don't forget that solution, because we're going to see this puzzle again soon. We're going to see it a lot. So that seems to be it, right? You walk down a corridor, you solve a puzzle, you get to the end. Simple enough. Alright, now I'm going to modify the game again so that when you press enter, it'll remove all of the walls from this room. How about that? There was more to it than we had any way of knowing. I actually find it funny that this game comes after the Stairs game, since they essentially convey the opposite idea. So, in the Stairs game, a dull exterior concealed a rich interior. And then, in this level, a dull interior hides this fantastic outer world. Either way, I think that the point is the same, is that most of the time you don't get to know what you're missing, or even that you're missing anything. That's not your role as a player. So if your role here is not to understand, then what is it?
It's a really like interesting idea, that of like how, because it's kind of like, it's like anything, isn't it? It's like when you know that there were all these other places you could have been, it almost it's like you've solved a puzzle and there should be like this feeling of gratification, but then when you know there's all these other options out there, it kind of removes the gratification, and it kind of makes you like, it's like the like the repercussions of, and like being hidden from.
So how was that? Just like he just showed, you wouldn't have ever normally seen that.
No.
That's so interesting. Yeah, really wild. I guess it's like the curse of obviously like just multiple choice. You know, sort of like the other storylines that could have happened.
It's such an interesting.
You never get to know unless you know, like you really want to go on that. And I suppose that a good representation of that's its vastness.
And do you know what's fascinating about it though, is it's kind of like it all feels so personal, because it's kind of like, the interesting thing is like Coda, technically, if he made that game in the way he actually made it without Davey having hacked it, he never released that game to the public. So he's the only person who would have known. But then if he knew anyway, why was he hiding it? Do you know what I mean? It's like it's almost like, it's a really kind of bizarre.
Well, I don't really know, you know, who he was sharing it with, and I don't know if it's that almost like the point, the people he shared it with.
Interesting.
The people he shared it with was almost the intention. That was the kind of like, is in, if they was people that actually had the ability to dive into it. That's who it was for. It was for them to unfold, as in Because as a regular game...
So he knew there was more there and he could see other people going through it.
And maybe you needed certain people to do that. Maybe as a regular game, you if you released that as it was, as in like if we played that and we never found out those things, it's the whole point of the fact that these people had the ability. Oh, this guy did. Had to unravel it a bit. To be seen.
Interesting.
Back here again.
You are now exiting.
Aha. So, this, combined with the entering game from earlier, tells us that Coda believes his games are connected somehow. It could even be that the stairs game and puzzle game are literally connected in between this and the entering game. There's a bigger picture that all of his games are meant to play a role in, some larger meaning that we won't be able to grasp until we've seen all of them. And once we have, we can step back and start to understand what exactly that bigger picture is.
The great and lovely descent.
Let's talk about video game development for a second. Every video game runs on what's called an engine, which determines what the game can and cannot do. So in other words, the engine is a set of tools for game development. To make all of these games, Coda is using an engine called Source. Like all engines, Source has certain things that it does well, and it has certain things that it does poorly. One of the things that it does very well is boxy linear corridors. That's why so many of Coda's games are set in these large, flat, empty rooms, is just because he's working with what the engine does well. The tools available to the creator shape what kinds of creative work they're going to end up making. You might consider paying attention to the architecture in Coda's games to notice how they seem to stem from an engine that's very good at producing linear, boxy corridors. This prison, funny enough, in Coda's original design, the doors stayed shut for a full hour before letting you go. If you don't mind, I think we're gonna skip that. This is something that he and I used to argue about a lot. You know, whether a game ought to actually be playable, whether it means anything if no one can get through it. And I would always defend that, you know, all this work goes into the game, why not make it playable and accessible? And so we just got into heated arguments over it, and there was one time that after one of these conversations, he went home, and a day or two later, he sent me a zip file entitled Playable Games that was full of hundreds of individual games, each of which was just an empty box that you walked around in and nothing else. Believe me, I played every single one of those just to find out if there was like a gag hidden somewhere. There wasn't. It's the puzzle again, with the exact same solution as the last time. There's still no clear indication of what makes this puzzle so special that Coda is going to return to it over and over. But I promise I'll share with you my interpretation very shortly.
You there, did you come
Here, Coda begins using a kind of dialogue system that he fashioned out of the engine's chat capabilities. Use the 1, 2, 3 buttons on your keyboard to respond.
Enormous prison I spent hours in. Yes, there were these floating coloured blocks. Which one?
Yes, there were these floating coloured blocks.
That's the world above. You've been there. Now this is important. Did you have to get through a puzzle with 2 doors and switches? Yes, I did. That was literally the last thing I did before coming. No, I don't remember having to go through any puzzle. I'd prefer not to tell you. After all, we've only just met. Prefer not to tell you. What? But you don't understand. We are trapped here. That puzzle is our only escape. We need to get through. You think you want to get through, but trust me, you don't. Let me describe it for you. Let me tell you all about it. Alright, I will tell you how to solve it. You think you want to get through, but trust me, you don't. Oh no, but I do. We do. We need to get there. Do you understand? This is the most important thing in the world. We have to escape this prison. There must be an ending. I promise you, there is nothing I want more. Hello, how did you get here? Was there a puzzle you had to pass through? No, I've been right here the entire time. I suggest you go through and see the puzzle. It's not meant to be solved, but you can sit in a black space in the middle. What happens if I solve it? Not sure, but if I have any suspicion, what you find there won't be worth what it takes. Okay.
And so we make one last descent down to the final floor of the level. It's a lamppost. Okay, I can't tell you quite why, but for some reason, Coda fixates on this lamppost. It's going to appear at the end of every single one of his games from here on out. I'll tell you what I think. I think that up to this point, he's been making really strange and abstract games with no clear purpose, and maybe you can only float around in that headspace for so long. Because now he wants something to hold on to. He wants a reference point. He wants the work to be leading to something. He wants a destination, which is what this lamppost is. It's a destination. We're going to see it in the work as well. His games are just going to become a lot more cohesive, a lot more fully developed, with more of a clear idea behind them. And as we go, that idea will get clearer and clearer and clearer.
What do you think about that one?
Well, I was kind of just listening to what you're saying. I mean, that was definitely the longest journey. I'm intrigued to see where that light goes. Is that like the source, the end of all games?
The whole prison thing as well, though, is kind of like. But even, like, I don't know, like, what do you think
it's
about...
it made you wait for an hour the first time.
Yeah.
That's just harsh.
But then there is, like... It's kind of like... It's almost like going to a, like a flipping silent meditation retreat and then just skipping past the actual 10 days.
And or you just, finally I'm out.
But that's what I mean. Like, there's obviously a purpose to it.
Of that.
Yeah. Like, there's something in that, and it's like Davey's just like overwriting it because he thinks, like, to him that's boring.
Yeah,
but maybe there was something in that, that was meant to in itself. Because that's the thing, right? With any challenges and rewards, like very often it's like that feeling of accomplishment that you get from achieving something difficult, which is where you get that feeling from.
I guess it's somewhat more like real life, the whole waiting part of it. And I guess with games is they normally give you something to be entertained by.
Yeah.
And
that's what he's saying. Like, he's having arguments with him about it, of like, you know, should a game be playable? And it's kind of like, well, that's just the ideas that we have of games, that some people have of games, you know?
Yeah, interesting to let you suffer.
But that's the thing. It's like some, you know, you I guess these things can be constrained or restrained by the medium, right? Like, what is a game? Like, who gets to decide what a game is? And therefore the experience you're able to have with it is then constrained by what our beliefs about that medium is. It's an interesting thought, because I guess that applies to it applies to humans as well, right? Like what a human can be, like our ideas of what a human can be is then constrained by that, and we can't kind of go outside of that.
So first off, I'm sure you can deduce this, but this game is not connected to the internet. All of the notes that you're gonna see have been written by Coda. This was actually the first game of his that I ever played. This was shortly after I met him at a weekend game jam in Sacramento.
It's kind of interesting how he was just saying it's not actually connected to the internet. So these are just all notes that Coda's like put in. It's like a kind of dialogue with himself, but it kind of does make it feel. There are actually games. There's a game, I can't remember which one. I think it was Dark Souls, one of the Dark Souls games that like originally had this concept first, where you could kind of leave notes for other players and say like, there's a really flipping hard boss here. So it was a really cool concept, because you never actually got to see other players, but then you could leave notes for them, and it was almost this like it was like a really nice touch of like, someone's been here before, and it's like people can leave helping hands. And they were generally like, sometimes people would just write random shit, but most of the time they were really supportive.
And I suppose I mean, it says something interesting about maybe the development of games, where maybe we all just individually start editing.
Where I grew up, I saw him working on this very level, and it was just so different from anything that anyone else was doing. So right away I was like, I have to be friends with this person. In retrospect, I think I was probably a bit too pushy trying to get his attention. I was over enthusiastic, but he was very gracious about it and very patient with me. And I cooled off eventually. Oh, feel free to skip over any of these notes if they're not doing anything for you. Nothing extra is going to happen if you read all of them. Either way, to me they convey a sense of loneliness. I see this person who's filled with thoughts and feelings and beliefs and has no way to express them except as scattered and unheard voices in a game that wasn't meant to be played.
What do you think about that? Do you think that's true?
What?
No, what he's saying. He's making a lot of assumptions, Davey. Do you know what I mean? He's saying, like, you know, this shows how lonely Coda is, and I find it, you know, like, you can just play a game and get to know someone without having to socialize with them and understand them on a deeper level. Like, it just feels, like, to me, it feels really icky. Like,
I felt, from what I get so far, I feel like these, sure, some of them may be accidents, but I think they're all so far apart in their style that the concept is the message. The concept is the subject, so like this is an idea that you can, like I was saying, it's like, okay, and like you were saying with that game, and you could leave notes. I was like, well, that's actually just the real world. We built on each other's ideas. And yeah, in terms of that, I rather than just notes, it'd be interesting to see a game where we all individually begin to edit it, change it, exactly in the same way that we do with the real world.
Well, that's what I mean, right? Like your interpretation of it, and I'm interested. It's interesting hearing your thoughts as a kind of artist as well, because from what you're saying, you seem to be kind of separating like these individual concepts, whereas Davey is building using these games in a linear progression to build a picture of who Coda is. Do you know what I mean? He's saying like, oh, he's lonely and he's like, doing these things for like self-punishment and being locked in, like, and maybe I'd imagine that there's someone that's probably played these games continuously. He may actually be picking up on something that I'm not seeing it for the first time. But seeing it for the first time, it certainly looks like they feel like less. You could pinpoint all the little things that are happening in it, but I sort of like, it's almost like, like you say, at the end of a dream, it's like, oh yeah, this happened and this happened and this happened and this happened. And you're like, but all that stuff was just shit that you saw throughout your day. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? It's like sparks of the brain. Yeah. Whereas I feel like the dream is like, well, what was that feeling you had? Like, how did that make? And I think there's the subject. I think there's what he's trying to say, is what is the feeling of seeing these notes. But that's the thing, right? But then it's like, and this was the whole kind of irony to this, is at the start of it, he says like, I want us to see beyond these games and get to know Coda for who he really is. But then there's this kind of weird thing that starts to happen as you keep playing, where because Davey's narrating his interpretation over it, we're now no longer able to interpret it in our own ways. Do you know what I mean? Because we're like our view of Coda is now biased through the lens of Davey. Through a narrative. It's kind of like, if you could put a narrative over any movie. Have you ever seen those things, like those like clips of like Star Wars, for example, where they put like romantic music over like Darth Vader and Luke, and it like changes. It's like context, right? It's like music, narratives, they can completely change the context of a scene. So it's kind of like, he's like, oh, the whole opening is like, I want you guys to get to know my friend and learn all about him. And it's like, but then we're not really you're giving us these games to experience, but then you're not allowing us to actually play the games as they were developed. You're augmenting them and then layering your own opinion on top of it.
Is because it felt like they let me have that connection. I felt as though he was inviting me personally into his world. And then I feel less lonely too.
But is he inviting you personally into his world?
Yeah, I don't necessarily relate these to his personal comments. I actually see them more as like, I guess the entertainment, or like what comments are like.
Yeah.
What individual people might react like to. I mean, it even said you're on the internet. It's meant to give you the feeling that you're experiencing a world of other people interacting. Comments.
Yeah.
I think that whole start note saying that you're on the internet is really showing that it's not. I don't think this is his point of view. Yeah. These are his thoughts. I feel like it's. I think especially if you make games and you're into games, that's why these comments. It's the language that you see on the internet.
Yeah, it's like meme culture and stuff.
It's the hilarious chaos of it all as well.
Yeah.
Of just reading. Scrolling down comments on anything, isn't it? It's like, oh my god. I mean, it's a very interesting idea because like even that scrolling down comments, but it's kind of like, and it's like you go on a journey when you scroll down comments, but this literally gives you a journey.
A journey, yeah. That's really true, actually.
Yeah. I feel like.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah, I think this is a visual comment scrolling.
It's really interesting. It's like really, my brain's really confused now because it's like, it's interesting hearing your thoughts on it as well, because you're seeing these through a very different way that I've seen them, and then Davey's narrating his thoughts on it, and then I got my thoughts, and it's like, whoa, there's all these different. It just shows you how all of these things can have so many different interpretations, right?
At the end of this level, we're going to see the puzzle again. And here, I'll tell you what I think the puzzle means. Each of these games represents an idea that was on Coda's mind at the time that he was making it. And the puzzle is a way of closing the door on a previous chapter of his life before moving on to the next one. In each of his games, after exploring a theme that, he might find difficult, Coda can then place this puzzle that he knows has a reliable solution, he understands exactly how it works, and so it gives him a simple mechanism for moving on. And because there's this dark area between the doors, a space between spaces, before you move on, you get to pause. Just for a moment, a few seconds to reflect on and let go of the events that led you here. To step back and connect the pieces together. To grasp at that elusive bigger picture.
Pow, pow.
I'm really impressed with, like, it's been super interesting going through it with you, because I've played through it before, right? And it's like, I think you've got a really good ability to be able to, like you say, like, not be able to separate and leave space for when I first played through it, I was totally sucked into like Davey's narration of like, oh wow, oh yeah, like, oh yeah, I can see this guy, oh yeah, he's super lonely, and it's almost like I've fallen right into that trap, like a Venus flytrap, but you're like really kind of like allowing the space, which is really impressive actually. It's a good trait to have, like, to be able to do that, because I think that's tough to do. Like, I'd be interested, like, when we share this, I'd love for people to like leave their comments of like how you feel going through it as well, because it's a really interesting experience. Like, I think when people go through this, and I just find it fascinating of how you can, I think, be misled by these things. And even to your point about like viewing them all as individual isolated concepts, because this is the other thing, right? The way in which the game's presented, because he's done it in this chronological order, and the narration is almost like, it's like a string tying them all together. So he's kind of saying like, oh, here's what's happening, here's how Coda's life is panning out. But to your point, like, if you view them as just these isolated individual concepts, there's no now story, there's no bridge, there's no narrative, there's nothing tying them together. They are just like paintings, like, this is representing this, this is representing this. They're not necessarily meant to be connected.
I do like the connecting themes of the lamppost, and I do think artists will generally tend to do that with their music or an album or a painting.
Some sort of through line.
Yeah, and like I said, maybe you don't do that straight away with any intention, or maybe when you're writing a screenplay, you don't know what the end is. I think it's very common to like, you work that out later on, and I think that like a very rough idea, like maybe he had some rough idea of what that lamppost was meant to represent.
Maybe it literally is like a light in the dark. It's like you're kind of throwing down a beacon to.
Yeah, I sort of feel like it's the source. It sort of feels like that's the end result of all the plays that you go through. Is like, it ends with just the light. That was just always that's where you're always destined to end up, and then you go through another story and another story, and it feels like a very like symbolic final end, which is why I thought that actually last one was kind of interesting, because it didn't end there. It actually ended with you leaving that lamppost.
Yeah,
which was a kind of an interesting move. You got totally shut off from it.
Yeah, it's a good point actually. That's a very. I hadn't seen that. Oh, this is super interesting. You see so many things I like just didn't even see, and it's kind of like it's good.
It's good.
I think
it's wild.
Yeah,
and what you say, I don't know what you were saying earlier, but just like I guess we all do that in life, though. Is just sort of to be generally jump on the new bandwagon, and that is in like we're listening to his point of view. But I was kind of thinking about it earlier. Only recently, I was thinking about it just with like advertisement, and we buy things and we represent ourselves in a certain. These are my values, and we. I think it's not just like he's like a voice that you're listening to, but I think we all do that. It's really hard not to do that.
Like the best example I can think of, like when someone, you're going to meet someone for the first time, and your friend says like, "Oh God, they're so annoying."
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And then you meet them, expecting them to be really annoying, and this is and I hate it when people do that, because you're then actually looking for the annoying. You're like, okay, where's this annoying thing?
It's
about
so real.
That?
Yeah.
And you completely now tarnished your view of that person. Whereas if they never said that, you might see a completely different side to them, because you don't know where that annoying. It might have been a personal dispute, or they might have misread something and now they think they're annoying.
I mean, that's very real, but I'm kind of like seeing also, like I was thinking it the other day or something, but it's just generally not even like that's very real, and individuals do that. They tell you something, but I was thinking more in just relation to like an environment selling you, or just like adapting to an environment. You mold yourself, and as a result of that, you mold your perspective, on your reality, and it's just sort of like I don't think it's like that's a very obvious example, like when someone's telling you about a person and you're being told something, but I think there are more subtle things just within your environment that tell you to act away without anyone even saying anything.
Yeah.
That your environment gives you a kind of nudge that you should be thinking in a particular way. And I feel like that kind of just relates into that same voice.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
The narrator, the kind of environmental narrator.
It's a very interesting point. Cool. All right. Well, we'll come back for a part two, maybe a part 3 to finish it off. But yeah, that was fun. That was super excited. So I'm
crazy.
Looking forward to the next one. Gonna end it on a cliffhanger.
Oh, what happens? That was wild. I mean, I'm kind of I'm pretty. And it's also just like nice to see the improvements in the game. But I definitely feel like I really like the fact that there's such small projects. I think that really allows a personal little deep dive.
Yeah.
Rather than a big game, or obviously there's loads of kind of small games out there, but like I definitely there is this lovely personal aspect to it, and that feels really nice. And you definitely get that with games. You see a bit of people's culture and their life and their experience, but this is kind of really.
Well, this is why I like indie. They call them indie games, like games by independent developers. Or even like very small studios, like small independent studios, not from these big like public companies like EA and Rockstar and people like that. It's like, small like 5-10 people teams where, a lot of the time it will be from their own personal stories, and they really put their own they put their own selves into it, you know, their souls into it, and yeah, you really can feel it. You know, the indie games are just wild. There's so many cool ones. So yeah, when we finish this, there's a lot of other interesting ones we can go through for sure.
Nice.
Yeah,
It's been a good deep dive.
it sure has. Cool. All right, guys. Well, let us know your thoughts in the comments, and we will see you back for part 2.
Love it.
Farewell.